It's funny. Never mind. Hi. This is on imagination. And we are breaking down your trauma sequence. So this I'm excited about. This I'm like, ooh. So the trauma sequence. I'm going to go ahead and break down the stages of your trauma sequence. And the purpose of this video is you take whatever the hell you need to take out of this for yourself so you can understand and define. This is what you need to do, is you need to understand and define. In order to understand, you must define the logic. Well, you must define it. The process, this process is logic. This process is logic. It's understanding and defining. Now, once you understand and define, then you can get relativity. And that's it. Then you gain relativity. Okay, so the first thing is the word no. This is, was the word no allowed by your parents? The word no is your boundary. This is your boundary. This is your first boundary. This is your first boundary. And were you allowed to make objections? Were your desires and feelings taken into account during decision making? Were you expected to obey despite your rejections? Were you even allowed to reject, choose, object? Were you even allowed to speak? So this is vital. This is the very first part of your sequence, and it happens around 2 to 3 years old. 2 to 3 years old. Now the next stage, and this is part of it, so we're going to like really dissect. This is 2 to 3 years old. This is 2 to 3 years old. And the next part of this is, were you allowed to be mean? Now, the reason why this is important is because being mean is mandatory for child development to understand kindness. There. So I just want to take a step back, because that right there is your 2 to 3 year old problem. That is what happens in most cases to every 2 to 3 year old, is we are not allowed to be mean. We are not allowed to talk. We are not allowed to say no. Our objections, our protests, our voices are literally undefined. It's a really good way of putting it. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw that right in here. Was your voice invalidated? Your voice is your visibility of the abstract. That's it right there. So this is the very first trauma. All trauma starts right here. Every single one of it, all of it. It's the, how did your parents respond to you saying no? Were you spanked for it? I was spanked for it. If I said no, I was spanked. I was spanked. I was physically abused for using a boundary. Were you? I was 6 months old when I was spanked for the first time because I cried. I was physically punished for using my emotions. So that's the next thing, is your 10th ethic, emotional fluidity. Were your emotions allowed? Now, a lot of people are going to say, fuck that shit. No, they weren't. Of course. So your emotions are your metric for danger, mental harm, abstract abuse. I'm going to say abstract harm. Your emotions are your metric for danger, mental harm, and abstract harm. Were you punished and or rejected for your metric? There's something else I want to say here. Of mental harm. When this happens, how do I explain this? A false lesson is learned in place of truth. The false lesson, which is false, yeah, it's logical fallacy, is boundaries are not respected. Ooh, I now know what respect means. Honored, preserved. Boundaries are not respected, honored, or preserved. The individual is not known and or accepted by the predecessor. The individual has to choose between the self, truth, specifically the self and truth, both of these things, versus belonging and safety. This teaches the self-preservation system to self-attack. It's not the right word. I'm going to have to figure out the right word here in a minute. Self-destruct. That's what I'm trying to say. This teaches the self-preservation system to self-destruct. It's literally the self-destruction being activated. Destroy the self to survive. That is the message received. That is all what happens to almost every one of us between the ages of 2 and 3 years old. Precisely when, where, and how in our development between ages 1, 2, and 3 is going to determine how that is. The additional possible coding that you received, and this happens, this is in addition to, this can happen in addition to, so this is in addition to or in place of you were used by your predecessor as a security blanket to comfort the parent, making you, this is horrible, but I'm just going to say it, You were used as Linus's blanket. There it is. You're Linus's blanket. That is what you were most likely reduced to. Linus's blanket. And if you did not obey according to the rules of Linus's blanket, then you have no purpose. So your purpose in life is to be Linus's blanket. This is a lot. I'm going to tell you right now, this video is really going to hit a lot of people at home. This is going to fucking hurt. This is truth. But once you have the words, you can plug it in. Did your caregiver use you as a real life Linus's blanket? If you do not know, what rock have you been living under? But let's say it anyway. Linus's blanket, if you have not watched Charlie Brown and the Peanuts, what rock have you been living under? If you do not know Charlie Brown and Linus's blanket, is a boy in the show who has a severe attachment to his blanket. His name is Linus, and he carries this blanket with him everywhere he goes. There's one line that's really very immoral, actually, in the show. It's like one of the lines, top lines, is one of the characters says, "What are you going to do with that thing when you're an adult?" "I thought about having it turned into a sports jacket." And that's it. The boy is so attached to his blanket that he makes plans on having the blanket turned into a sports jacket when he's an adult, so he never has to leave it. And if you do not behave according as Linus's blanket for your mother, then you have no purpose. Your only job is to be Linus's blanket. Now you're going to have identity issues. Now you're going to turn on yourself and you're going to self-destruct. Now you have literally I have to destroy the self in order to exist. Now you have disintegration. Now you have internal conflict where it is literally a civil war. This is the internal civil war. This is what your problem is. This literally, all of this, these three things lead to, let me see here. Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is, all right, let me see here. So there's Linus's blankets. So in addition to that, so this results in civil war within the self. That's it. You have a civil war inside yourself. That's your sequence. That's just the first 2 to 3 years of life. That's it. That is what the majority of us have. I really don't have to go beyond this. You solve this problem and you're good. This is going to solve everything. This right here is going to solve everything. Now, when your no was violated, that was not teaching you the fourth ethic. When your Linus blanket, I'm actually going to write this all out. That way you can see why the 12 ethics is going to repair all of this, is because, so this right here, this is the no being violated. This is the violation. This is the parent violating your fourth ethic. That's what that is. That is your parent violating your fourth ethic. Were you allowed to be mean? Being mean is mandatory for kindness. This is your parent violating your second ethic. Was your voice violated? This is all second ethic. Your emotions are your metric for danger, violence, abstract. Were you allowed? This is your parents violating your 10th ethic. Were you punished and or rejected for your metric of mental harm? This happens, a false lesson is learned in place of logic. This is you now violating your 11th ethic. False lesson to logical fallacy is boundaries are not respected. That's your fourth ethic. The individual is not known or accepted by the predecessor. This is the first ethic being violated. The individual has to choose between the self and truth belonging to safety. This is the first ethic being violated. This teaches the self-preservation system to self-destruct, to destroy the self, to survive. So when you violate any of the ethics, you are actually causing a civil war inside of the self. So in addition to that, are you Linus's blanket? This is the first ethic being violated. Did your caregiver use you as a real life Linus's blanket? So this right here is already your parents violating like 5 of the ethics. Boom, 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 right off. And you haven't even begun life. Now, in addition to that, you should be doing the actual sequence. So let's look at the actual sequence. Now, mind you, this is just the surface. We just began. So now the second violation, the second sequence is going to be the obstruction of your life sequence. Now, your life sequence should be learn music. Were you allowed to learn music? Were you allowed to sing? Were you allowed to dance? Were you allowed to paint or draw? Were you allowed to do art? Were you allowed to read? Wow, my parents just hit every fucking one of these, right? Nope, 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 nope. Were you allowed to write? Were you allowed to do math? Probably you were allowed to do math. However, this is arithmetic specifically. I'm going to put that here. However, there is a good chance that the first 5 weren't even allowed. That is the sequence. Arguing, that's logic. Were you allowed to argue or talk? That's logic. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. I accidentally deleted all of that, but I hit the undo button, so all is well. Okay, so now let's look at language. Were you allowed to talk? That's your linguistics. Were you allowed to argue? That is your logic. And then math begins. Now, I'm going to show you why you have a problem with math. 12 is physics. Watch this. I'm going to show you this. Oh, wait, I forgot. See, my parents obstructed theater and music, so let me try this again. So, theater, make-believe. Stage and poetry. Imagination. All right, now these, what I'm listing here, there we go. Now we're doing this. All right, now I want you take a look at the video description. And when you go over the video description, I have this is your sequence. This sequence is literally embedded instinctively, intuitively. This is what Mother Nature has us do. We have music, song, dance, painting, drawing, art, reading, writing. What was your parental response to each of these phases? Now, that's the first question I want to ask you. The next one is, did you know that 100% of learning in this order is sequential? This is the learning sequence, which means if your parents did not allow any, well, I should say if your parents excluded any of these subjects in their natural order, they obstructed your foundation for the next subject of learning. And there it is. That is why you have a problem with math. That is why you have a problem with physics. Look at it. So now you're walking into life with a violation on your first ethic, your second ethic, and your fourth ethic. You also have a violation of that order of operations. By the way, when you start music, you're usually around 1.5 to 2 years. That's when you start banging those pots in the kitchen. Music has begun. And then children naturally sing and they dance. Were you allowed to? Were you encouraged to? Or were you told that children should be singing, not heard? So now they're already obstructing your ability to sing and voice. Were you allowed to talk? Were you allowed to argue? Were you allowed to say no? Now you can see how your parents just warped your brain into whatever the fuck they wanted because they're miserable and they were horrible people because they were that uneducated. And then you throw them into school and now you're not going to be okay. We're not done yet. We are not done yet. We are just getting started. We are still only at the 3rd and 4-year-olds, just 3 and 4-year-olds. This is everything that should have taken place in your early development that didn't. There's one more big piece here. And now we are going to look at religion and tradition. We're also going to add in here lawyer or doctor. Religion, tradition, lawyer, doctor. This is called forced indulgence. That violates the second ethic. The second ethic is self-authority. So now your parents have, through religion, tradition, lawyer, doctor, forced indulgence that violates the second ethic, which is your self-authority. And this is all before you are 5 years old. This is all the trauma you have suffered before you are even 5 years old. That is all of it. You can literally take whatever cocktail is yours, pull all of it out there, and there you go. There's your cocktail. What was your variation? I've already broken this down into the variations. Now there's a timeline. So if you receive the brunt of your abuse at the first ethic violation, you are going to become a first ethical perspective who has a severe problem with addiction and an inability to leave home because you have absolutely no dependence because you are Linus's blanket. So there you are. You are Linus's blanket. That is the first ethic. The second ethical perspective, you have the problem with no self-authority. That is your problem. You are absolutely mindlessly a slave and a robot. You make a fantastic obedient servant. Very good. You are a slave. The third ethic is absolutely no trust because they have taken away your boundaries. As a result, you are incapable of using boundaries. You have no idea how to defend the self. They have taken away your defense system. That's what they've done. They've taken away your defense system. That is why third ethic is so abusive, is because they don't know how to defend themselves. So they attack everybody because they have no idea how to defend themselves. So are you Linus's blanket? Are you an obedient slave? Or do you lack a defense system? This is just the first 3 ethics. This all took place before you were 4 years old. That really summarizes our entire culture. We've got a bunch of people who are Linus's blankets, slaves, and no defense. That's why. We're only at 5 years old. The fourth ethic is the ability to internalize. And I'm going to tell you right now, most people can't make it to this. Most people don't make it to the fourth ethic. The people who are in the fourth ethic, they learned self-defense, but they learned it so well that they went the extreme and now they make everybody else do it and they're stuck there. So they're not actually learning the fourth ethic. So the fourth ethics are in the trial of the fourth ethic. They haven't completed the fourth ethic trial. They haven't learned the fourth ethic, which is personal law and self-control. They have to have everyone else telling them what to do because they lack no self-authority. That's why. The Linus blankets do whatever the fuck the second ethics tell them because they're Linus's blanket. That's why they do whatever the fuck the second ethics tell them. The second ethic is an obedient slave to usually the third or the fourth ethic, who's really good with telling everybody what to do because they are over defensive. There you have the problem. That is literally your trauma sequence. There's a good chance you never made it beyond this point. Do I need to continue? We're only at 5 years old. Do we need to continue? If you made it past these 3 ethics, to be honest with you, you didn't stay in the other ethics very long. You grew beyond them and you're healthy, which means you're probably not here watching this video because you're healthy. It all comes down to those first 3 ethics. But more likely, you want to talk about your divorce. You probably want to talk about how abusers abused you. You probably want to talk about all the shit that's happened to you. You're distracting. You're not dealing with the problem. The problem is you're Linus's blanket, or you're a slave, or you don't know how to use your defense system, or all 3. Maybe it's 2 of those, depending upon your combination of trauma. At the end of the day, you've got to go back to that first ethic and resolve the fact that you were not allowed to say no when you were 2 and 3 years old. How bad was the abuse? That's the abuse you need to talk about. You need to get angry about that, because when you get angry about that, you start the progression of grief. That's really what needs to happen, is you need to go through the 5 stages of grief. The 5 stages of grief are this. First, there is shock and awe. I get that a lot with people. After that, you get, well, you then do this really awesome, let's do the words, forecasting, economics, and there's a word I'm looking for, purchasing. You go through purchasing with supply, demand, forecasting, and economics. You do that in your brain. That weighs in your scarcity and your abundance. And then you do the logical mathematical projection, where that's forecasting. Then you do the mathematical projection of forecasting, which allows you to assess your loss versus your gain. And now you have the ability to grieve. Now you're angry. That's good. That's good that you get angry. But you probably have a problem with anger because they violated the 10th ethic, which is your emotional fluidity. So you're probably resisting anger. Now you see what the problem is. Because you are resisting the 10th ethic, you're not getting angry, which is the 3rd stage of grief. What are you doing? You need anger to get through the stages of grief. But if you have a problem with anger, you're not going to make it through the stages. The next stage after anger is depression. Because you had a massive high, now you need to go to an immediate low. If you knew how to self-regulate, which is the 3rd ethic, you wouldn't be going high and then low. You would be able to self-regulate. But they violated your 3rd ethic, so you can't self-regulate. So you need self-regulation, the 3rd ethic, in order to make sure that you don't go really angry and really depressed. But if you haven't learned the 3rd ethic, you still have to get really angry to get really depressed to learn self-regulation, because anger and depression allow you to learn how to self-regulate. But in order to do that, you also have to learn how to be mean and then kind, because that's how you learn self-regulation. But you probably weren't allowed that either, because that's the 2nd ethic and they denied you of that. This is sequencing. Now, after the anger depression, you normalize. Normalize is when you adapt. And now you have learned adaption. This is the process of adaption. Now you can regulate. But you aren't allowed to regulate without the 10th ethic, which is the anger, the depression stage. And you require mathematics to do proper forecasting with economy and purchasing with mathematical projection. And this whole process is logic. But because you never got the 1st, 2nd, 3rd ethic and the art and everything you need prior to logic and math with linguistics and talking, they are not able to do this. So now you understand why you're stuck. This is why the sequence matters. This is all of the sequence. This is it right here. We are just at 5 years old. We haven't even started kindergarten yet. But this is what most people walk into kindergarten with. Now, teachers then step in. Everything is great in fifth and kindergarten. Everything is fantastic in first grade. They got that right. Second grade is when they fuck it up. So now we're going to jump ahead to the second grade. We are 7 years old in the second grade. So now jump ahead to second grade. So when we're in second grade, and I'm going to put here, we're now 7 years old. Art is gone. Imagination is gone. And this is the time we are told, Peter Pan, it's time to grow up. And this is when all shit hits the fan. This right here is when literally all shit, the whole thing just goes to shit. Is right here with that Peter Pan, it's time to grow up. So now we associate, we are taught, we are forced to give up imagination. But imagination is mathematics and problem solving. Imagination is, I just realized that the word magic is inside imagination. I am ashamed. Why am I just now realizing that magic is in the word imagination? I will have to talk about that with myself later. Peter Pan, it's time to grow up. Forced to give up imagination. Imagination is math and problem solving. So right away in second grade, we have been forced to abandon literally the core of mathematics, our imagination. Perfection is now expected. Perfection is the expectation of skill, mastery, this world is so fucked up. Perfection is the expectation of skill mastery without skill development. Chew on that. While also under time constraint with the impending threat of failure and rejection, of safety, love, survival. So perfection is not expected. Perfection is expected. Perfection is the expectation of skill mastery without skill development, while also under time constraint with the impending threat of failure and rejection of safety, love, survival, and belonging, which translates logically to ability to survive. And here's the logic of children. If I fail, then parents won't love me and will reject me, and I can't eat, sleep, or have shelter. Thus, I will die. There you go. That's child logic. That is it right there. This is what goes on at 7 years old. All at 7 years old. That's a lot for a 7-year-old. This is just the trauma sequence. And we're only at 7. This is literally all of the shit I had to sort out in my head to figure all of this shit out. And then I realized everybody has a variation of all of this. I suffered every trauma. Every one. Which is why I know every trauma. Because I suffered every single trauma. So I was able to sit down and identify every variation in everybody else. The racism was the hardest one to identify because I'm white, but I wasn't the right white. So that's a whole nother nightmare that I had to unravel. First, I had to get over the societal fact that, a white girl can still experience slavery and racism. That was hard. That was really hard to process because I wasn't a black man or a black woman, therefore I couldn't know what that means. And then when I processed what actually slavery is, I went, anyone can experience slavery and anybody can experience racism. So that's not even in there. This is absent of that. That's something else that I suffered. And then there is that's the breeding. That's like, this isn't including the breeding that I had. But that's not relevant. That is a consequence. That is a symptom of everything else. These are the keystones. These are the actual causes of all of this. What I'm listing here is the actual problem. All the other shit is not at all important to this because none of that other shit would have happened if this hadn't been. It's the catalyst that's the problem because the catalyst is what caused everything else. And once you understand the cause of it all, then you can resolve it. Now you fix the catalysts, you understand, this was invalid data because this occurred. This is what was done to me. I need to plug it in. You plug in the right if-then clauses, the right lessons, and the whole thing corrects in your mind. The rest of it becomes moot and invalid because, the foundation of that shit happening was this. So you fix the foundation. Go to the foundation, go to the root of the problem. This is the root of your problem. That you were not allowed to use the word no when you were 2 and 3 years old. That you may have been spanked, punished, abused, disciplined for arguing back. Arguing is how we practice logic properly. But our parents are not educated in logic to know how to have an actual argument, to actually have a conversation. So we never practiced it. We were just told to shut up because they didn't know how. So silence was replaced with logic. So now that's in your brain. Don't use logic, be quiet. When you try and open your voice, what you're actually doing is replacing logic with the silence. But you don't know about logic. You've never heard of logic, most likely, because it's not taught in our educational systems. Because our educators are traumatized. We're learning from a bunch of trauma victims. Your educators are traumatized. Your psychologists are the largest group of trauma victims in the world. Did you ever think about this? That the reason why people go into psychology is because they are trauma victims. They are the worst trauma victims. And they go into psychology so they can understand and fix themselves because they're that traumatized. And then they heal. Not really, because Freud's psychology doesn't work. And then they go on to be psychologists. So you've got the worst of trauma victims now teaching you trauma their way. And we wonder why there's a mental health crisis. Because the most sick of us went into psychology. It's the most extraordinary thing is to walk into a psychological office and see all the catty narcissism that goes on with the psychologists. And it's like, wow. Teachers are narcissists. It attracts the most bullies because the bullies realize I'm the biggest thing on the playground. They never leave the schools. The bullies are the ones who stay in school, who never go on to leave because they can bully and abuse children the rest of their lives without anyone telling them what to do, which is why a lot of teachers lead the bullyings in school. That's why a lot of teachers do nothing, is because they're the bullies. So the bullies become teachers. The mentally ill become psychologists, because the fields attract. There it is. The worst thing that could have happened to this world is the field of psychology. If you actually look at Freud's life and his psychology, Freud was mentally ill, very mentally ill. He was so mentally ill that he was doing everything he could to figure out his own mental illness. That's why he was doing what he was doing. And if you study Freud's early work, he was schizophrenic. Oh, good God, was he schizophrenic? He was so fucking delusional because he was mentally ill. Freud was trying to cure his own schizophrenia without having any idea what he was doing. And all of these people followed suit, having no idea what he was doing. That's just 7 years old. So now you have educational trauma. I feel like, okay, yeah, 5 years old. Let's go all the way down. So 7 years old. So there you are at 7 years old. Now let's talk about power of choice, which is that's the first and second ethic. Power of choice. First and second ethic. This is actually the world of non-consent and a loss of freedom, which is ability to choose without consequence, without fear. I just need to use fear. The word consequence is really irrelevant to this. The emphasis is on the word fear. Choose without fear. Did you have the ability and the freedom to choose without fear? This is psychological safety. Psychological safety is free will. And there it is. So now, if you do not have the freedom of choice, non-consent, loss of freedom, and when your power of choice is violated, this leads to a loss of control. And this is literally the sequence. This is the sequence. You lose control. You lose right to reject. You lose self-authority. You lose confidence. You lose self-esteem. This is why you are insecure. You lose security. This is in addition to all the other violations still taking place. This is in addition to all other violations. This is devastating. This is really devastating. This is the trauma sequence. I'm going to go ahead and do another video, and now I'm going to walk you through the actual sequence of what it's supposed to look like so you have comparison. And there's more. This is just 7 years old. This is just 7 years old. We're not talking about your identity getting squandered to the point where your identity can't take it anymore and it screams, fuck this insanity, what the hell is going on? Oh, well, now you're going to be labeled and we're going to call you names like teenager. Oh, well, that's just a typical teenager. Forget that. No, we're not going to talk about that. And then you suppress it all down. You do the path that your parents say. And then at 40 to 45, you snap again and you go, oh my God, I can't stand this. I've got to get out. And then you're just having a midlife crisis. The invalidation, the name calling, and the labeling. You finally get out. You go off and you do the life you want. And then you're disowned for it. And then you have to start your life over. We're not talking about that. We haven't even gotten into everything. The rest is consequential. What matters is everything prior to 7 years old, which is what Carl Jung said. Exactly. And he was a philosopher, which is exactly what Carl Jung said. Is the child is already identified and defined by the time they are 8 years old. This is why. So now we're going to go ahead and do another video where I'm just going to break down the actual sequence, the natural sequence of what you're supposed to be following according to Mother Nature. And how when you restore that sequence, everything changes. Everything changes. Thank you so much. And may the truth always find you.